Yay, it worked, or at least I think it worked. I'm not entirely prepared here, so things are going to be a little noisy while I get prepared. I forgot to grab the freaking book, and so you're going to hear a bunch of noise because there's stuff sitting on top of it. There we go. So what I'm going to do here, oh, I have to do one other thing too. Find can opener, open beer bottle. Yes. Jerry Bergman wrote a book called Slaughter of the Dissidents. Now, the whole point of this book is to say how Christians are being so terribly mistreated, in universities and what have you. And I'm going to have to look at the live chat here to see if, oh, I'm sorry, Crow, but no, we're not going to slaughter anyone. Could you tell me, since you're listening, could you tell me how I sound? Because I don't want to like switch to and I need to open the I have everything everywhere, so but that's okay, you got to wait for people to show up. And since I haven't done Hangouts in quite a while, on top of which I'm on my old Hangout channel, not my main channel, and that's because I got a strike because of a video I made against the against the people who were saying that not Columbine, Sandy Hook didn't happen. I made a video.
You got a strike about that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, do you know who the fucker who striked you was? Because I'm about to get rid of their fucking channel.
No, I don't. I don't. No, YouTube said it. No, YouTube said it was against community guidelines, and I tried to appeal it, and I just found out that org, org also got a similar strike for criticizing a Sandy Hook people, truthers. So can you believe that? So I need to.
I'm afraid that sometimes these requests, or whoever the fuck does it, doesn't understand the difference between Sandy Hook hoaxers and the people who are criticizing them. That's probably what it is.
Yeah, I think so.
On my part.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's true, unfortunately. So I can't do Hangouts on that channel for a while, but that's okay because I have this channel. I originally created this channel for that very same reason, because I got a stupid strike years ago. Unfortunately, I don't think YouTube actually bothers to watch the videos. They just, because what a really stupid thing. Here we go. Slaughter of the Dissidents. I got my Word file up. Yeah. The thing is, I have the book here. I have notes written in the book. I actually have, in case you heard that, yes, I actually have handwritten notes on paper, and I have a Word file. So I'm like totally, ready for this. I've been meaning to do this for a while. So here's the thing. I'll be mostly going for the book, so you'll hear me.
I'll be right back. Sorry, dude.
No problem. Excuse me. I'm just sort of vamping right now. Anyway. So yeah, Jerry Bergman says, this is this deal about, the subtitle is, the shocking truth about killing the careers of Darwin doubters. Now this is volume 1. I haven't read volume 2, but I've been thoroughly through, volume 1. And the idea here that he's trying to promote is that if you disagree with evolution, it kind of destroys your career. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look at the book. And because I'm going to be going back and forth between 3 things here. And yeah, I know someone's going to say, well, gee, Jade, you could have put it all together. And you're right, I could have put it all together, but I didn't. So you'll just have to be patient. And I don't know how far I'm going to go through this. And I don't know, if anyone wants to join or not. I didn't really prepare for this, or, talk to people and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. So,
Want to hear a funny one?
Yeah.
I posted your message to Tommy about
Oh,
cancer
yeah.
being caused by evil pixies.
Yes.
And he said the same thing you did about your group. This is a jade-free zone.
Well, he knows. Hey,
Is it Tommy Hall free zone? Jade-free zone.
You're gonna hear some noise here for a minute. There we go. I've got munchies here as well as beer. So, well, you know what? He knows that the Tommy Block Club exists.
Does
he's
he?
not happy. Yeah, and he's not happy about it. So he's gonna retaliate like a child. Now, the Tommy Block Club is public. You know, anyone can see the. I think anyone can see the posts.
Yes.
So, right. So you know, he can see the posts.
Sure.
And if he wanted to comment on something on the post, he could send me a message. The thing is, I don't want him in the club because the whole purpose of the club is, which a club is sort of a stupid name anyway, but what the hell, it works. The whole purpose was to have a place where we could discuss these papers and the crazy stuff that Tommy says without Tommy barging in and distracting and going sideways and upside down and inside out and being, you know, irrelevant and, you know, and citation bluffing and all that stuff, because he interrupts really good conversations about the actual subject. And if he were to ever want to comment on something, it is public, you know, he could send me a message or send somebody else a message.
I could invite him to this hangout now.
Yeah, well, I'd rather not.
Okay.
Yeah, only because you know darn well he's going to go sideways on some of this stuff. Because the thing is these, yeah, Crow goes slaughter. It just ain't what it used to be. Yeah, I'm sorry, it really isn't. But even in this book, it just isn't what it used to be. So I guess I'll get started on the book. Let's see. It's about not counting index and in bibliography. It's just to let you know. It's where am I? Okay, 358 pages long. So I'm going to start with the chapter 1. And, you know, people can ask questions. I'm not really good at watching the live chat while I'm doing this. So it, you know, may take me a little bit to catch up, but I will. So we're going to start start with this book. And the preface is by Dr. Jerry Bergman. He says, this book is not trying to prove or disprove an origins theory, but simply to argue that academics have the right to question Darwinism or some aspects of evolution without losing their careers or being denied degrees. Well, generally speaking, I agree with that. There is a problem, though. You can, and this is the basic problem underlying the book, and as far as all of his talking about, how oppressed these people are, if you are going to deny the basis of whatever subject it is you're trying to major in or you're trying to study, then why should you be allowed to continue in that study, or why should you be allowed to get a job in that area? An example would be, what if you decided you wanted to become a nurse or a physician, but you disagreed with the germ theory of disease? Should you be allowed to be a physician if you don't think the
no job?
Exactly. And that's really the basis of what's here. And I'm going to skip through this. Looking at the preface right now. The first subheader is hate crime on the rise. That gives you a pretty good idea of his position on this. And then he goes to, I'm not going to read a lot of the.
What the fuck does the rise in crime have anything to do with what he's talking about?
Well, what he means is that he goes okay, I'll go ahead and say, as I will document, many of the manifestations of discrimination against Darwin doubters should, in my opinion, qualify as hate crimes. So he's saying that the alleged
fuck himself in the ass, first of all, but go on.
I know. So the alleged discrimination against, dissenters from Darwin, which is kind of funny anyway, because Darwin died a long time ago. Darwinism has been supplanted a couple of times at least. So why the focus on Darwin? It's really interesting. But here's his list of forms of discrimination exercised against Darwin doubters. 1, derogatory and inappropriate comments. 2, denial of admittance to graduate programs. 3, denial of degrees. 4, denial of deserved promotion. 5, censorship of Darwin critical works from libraries and schools. 6, firings, terminations, and denial of tenure. 7, demotions. 8, threats and personal intimidation. Sounds pretty scary, right? Well, we'll get into what that means. And he has a list of various motives for discrimination against Darwin doubters. And I don't really care. Alleged weaknesses in the science of Darwin doubters, natural resistance of intellectual establishments to change. No, that's actually true. There is a certain natural resistance in any kind of establishment to change. Religious objections to Darwin doubters, naturalism versus theism. So I'm just reading the headlines here.
Forgive me for saying once again, but you nailed it right on the head at the start. Why is he talking about Darwin doubters as opposed to evolution? What Darwin was and what evolution is now are very different.
Exactly, but they like to confuse the issue. And then he goes on the need to stand up for our rights, the modern growth of anti-Christian sentiment in America. So apparently, again, he's conflating Christianity with anti-evolution, which is bull. Most Christians, most major Christian groups actually accept evolution. Attacks on individuals. Okay, you know what? There are occasionally attacks on people for different reasons. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a widespread plan of attack on people, and we'll see if we get to that in here. There are idiots everywhere. Let's face it.
Although I must say, if I was with somebody or I met somebody who started saying that evolution isn't true, it's just a myth, it's just science, I might say to them, so my uncle, who's now dead and worked in the biology department for all those years, head of the biology department at John Carroll University, was just lying? Is that what you're telling me? Is that what you're telling me? And if he says yes, or she says yes, well then, it's all over, and I'll call my lawyer from the jail. Because people like you and Fiona and lots of people, my uncle, many people have worked so hard on this, and they're just the opposite. They're trying to find out the truth. And for some asshole with a bridge to sell to come and say someone in my family is lying, yeah, there might be violence. Good for me.
Well, I don't approve of violence, but I understand your sentiment. So let's go into this now. The chapter 1 is by Kevin Worth. Now, this is essentially, it says by Jerry Bergman, but Kevin Worth does write a little bit of it. So let's look at this. Volume 1, A Context for Discrimination Against Darwin Skeptics. Now, if you look at this, first again, Darwin skeptics. And even in the body, it refers to neo-Darwinism and Darwin doubters. Again, the emphasis on Darwin is ridiculous. And he talks about denial of freedom of speech, denial of freedom of expression. Well, freedom of speech actually doesn't exist everywhere. A lot of people have that confused. We have the freedom to speak. We have the freedom of assembly. But there are limitations on all of our freedoms. If you go to a particular university, if you have a particular job, that doesn't mean you get to say anything you want, because there are certain rules.
Yes, people do not understand that there are inherent limits on all of the First Amendment.
Yes.
If my religion is, well, I want to kill every second baby we have, no, we're not going to allow that. Well, they have freedom of religion. Bullshit. Doesn't allow you to do that.
Mm-hmm. So But anyway, so he goes on to talk about different types of Darwin doubters, scientific creationists, yeah, right, intelligent design advocates, Darwinians. There are some who managed to remain, and skeptics who are not married, and defining the context of discrimination. And again, this is he says activist groups opposed to freedom of speech and religious freedom, although they often deny it, have joined the fray in an effort to steamroll Americans with cries of separation of church and state whenever a brave educator dares to suggest to his students that there are problems with Darwinism, sick Darwinism, or that an intelligence may be behind the complex marvels of life we see every day. Many of these groups pretend to be experts on the true meaning of the First Amendment. Their lopsided focus ignores both the intent and the balance implicit in that text. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free speech thereof. Yeah, we all know it. Okay. Well, we know this is
point. What is his overall point? What is the overall problem he has with Darwinism?
Well, again, it's not Darwin, it's evolution, but they want to say Darwin. They want to say Darwin.
Right. But what's his? I mean, if you're going to say, oh well, there are all these problems with evolution and Darwinian theory, yeah, what the fuck are they? They never say.
Well, they will say that it's what it is. It's a limit. When you're talking about evolution, you're leaving out a whole bunch of stuff. You're not accepting that maybe there's an intelligence behind it. Well, the problem is that science does work according to methodological naturalism, because science is the investigation of the natural world using natural means. And you can hypothesize or posit anything you want, but for it to be accepted, you have to have, some rationale behind it. You have to have some explanation other than it happened. And when you hear from people who are creationists, the creationists will say, well, God is behind everything. Oh, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But you can't bring that into science because you can't scientifically test God. And if you're going to say that it's intelligent design, that there's some intelligence behind it, not necessarily a God, but some intelligence, okay, that's fine. What kind of intelligence or what kind of intelligences? Lay out your list, say, well, the intelligence exists, but you can't just say some intelligence and leave it at that. That's a big emptiness. And that's not scientific. If you're going to create a hypothesis, there has to be some mechanism there, some reason beyond some intelligence. And there are people who are trying to develop a hypothesis of intelligent design that does not rely on a God figure. And they haven't been terribly lucky about it. So anyway, so this is basically a bunch of whining. And I'm not gonna spend much time in this because this is kind of boring. So what I want to do is go through chapter 1. We're going to start with chapter 1 because that's where the fun begins. And a context for discrimination against Darwin's skeptics. And again, you're going to hear Darwin over, well, actually, we are in chapter 1, but you're going to hear Darwin over and over and over idea. And one of the things, where are we here? As I said, I have to go through different sources here. Okay, and there's a list here that's actually very interesting, and I'm going to read it out, 2 lists. And the reason I'm going to read these out are for those who want to know the difference, at least according to Worth, between scientific creationism and intelligent design. Because we don't often see that, and we do. The two are mixed together so often that how do you tell a difference? So these are his definitions. Scientific creationism is committed to the following propositions. A, there was a sudden creation of the universe, energy, and life from nothing. B, mutations and natural selection are insufficient to bring about the development of all living kinds from a single organism. C, Changes of the originally created kinds of plants and animals occur only within fixed limits. D, there is a separate ancestry for humans and apes. E, the Earth's geology can be explained via catastrophism, primarily by the occurrence of a worldwide flood. F, the Earth and living kinds have a relatively recent inception on the order of thousands or tens of thousands of years. Now, I want to go back to D for a minute. When they say
that is such bullshit. God,
I would just hang in there. Where they say there's a separate ancestry for humans and apes, they don't mean that humans and apes together have a separate ancestry. They mean humans have a separate ancestry from apes. Now, here's what he thinks intelligent design is. Well, he continues on with G, which kind of tells you something, doesn't it? He doesn't separate it. He just goes on to G from F. Specified complexity and irreducible complexity are reliable indicators or hallmarks of design. H, biological systems exhibit specified complexity and employ irreducibly complex subsystems. I, naturalistic mechanisms or undirected causes do not suffice to explain the origin of specified complexity or irreducible complexity. J, therefore, intelligent design constitutes the best explanation for the origin of specified complexity and irreducible complexity in biological systems. Now, I'm not going to go into these because I don't have any interest in them, but if someone else wants to at some time, I'd be more than happy to type these out because it would be interesting to explore them, but that's not where we're going right here. And it's what I'm going to look at. So let's go to the next page. I'm not actually going to go page by page, believe it or not. Okay. And one of the things they're talking about is then trilobites. Again, apologies. I am okay. I am going from different sources. I just wanted to make sure that the one source starts at a different place. So what are we looking at here? Is the origin of trilobites. And what I wanted to look at, and what I'm going to look at a lot in here, are his sources for what he's saying. He's talking about how trilobites are numerous and diverse. They're one of our best known fossils, and the variety of organisms of the early Cambrian, such complex forms, yada, yada, yada. If there had been evolution of life, the absence of the requisite fossils in the rocks older than the Cambrian is puzzling. Well, not really. But let's look at the let's look at the his links here. One of them is Philip Johnson. Evolution as Dogma: The Establishment of Naturalism. Philip Johnson is a creationist, and isn't that a great reference? Evolution as Dogma: The Establishment of Naturalism. And
yeah, that's an unbiased source right there, motherfucker.
Yeah, and then we're going to the next page, the bottom of page 48. S.M. Gonzalez. The question, where did trilobites come from, is not so simple to answer. Origin of trilobites, December 29. So it was revised a year after this book was published. If the ancestors of trilobites in the Precambrian were uncalcified, then their preservation would best be restricted to conservat Lagerstätten, which are very rare indeed. So what they're saying is this is the reference that they will only comment on they will only take portions from the references they use that serve their purpose and not the whole thing. So what the reference is actually saying is, well, why don't we find a lot of the background for trilobites? Well, because they're found in a very rare type of rock. So that makes perfectly sense. The ancestors of trilobites in the Precambrian were uncalcified, then their preservation and would be restricted to conservat Lagerstätten, which are very rare indeed. That's not surprising that we're not
interrupting. There's a place near where I live where you can find nothing but trilobites. You can just go out on the ground and find them. And, there's so many of them we don't even.
Well, but that's kind of his point here is we see so many trilobites. Why don't we see the ancestors of trilobites? And one of the answers is, well, if we were to find the ancestors of trilobites, they would be found in a particular strata that is extremely rare. If they had calcified, any parts of them were calcified. What we do know from the fossils that we find in Ediacaran, which is the era that era is not quite the right term, but the time that preceded the Cambrian, is that the fossils are all soft-bodied. The really big thing that happened during the Cambrian was the invention of solid parts, calcification. They learned how to use calcium and its various compounds to build body parts. So there may be ancestors of the trilobites in the Ediacaran. And we're now using modern, I don't want to get too sidetracked on the Ediacaran, but we're now using more modern methods like MRI scans and things like that, and being able to create 3D models, including printed 3D models, to take a look at what they actually look like, and that wasn't available before. So there is some suggestion that there are ancestors to some of the phyla that people seem to think it suddenly appeared in the Cambrian in the previous Ediacaran. And he said, and another point made by the actual reference is there are only a handful of sites on Earth that bear Cambrian metafossils at all. And we do have some questionable Precambrian arthropods. Some is Sprigina, Bomacella, which is maybe a soft-bodied trilobite. And so it's still up in the air, but it doesn't mean it isn't there.
Well, forgive me if I got this wrong, but I thought that anything Precambrian was extremely rare, and there are very few.
Correct. You're correct, and that's because the strata are very few. We're getting better. We being, when I say we, I use what I call the human we, the general we, the public who benefit from the scientists who do the work. It's all this information is available to everyone, and that's the we I'm talking about. So anyway, and then he goes on to the origin of jaws. And he says the transition from a jawless to a jawed mouth remains virtually undocumented by fossils. Theories about the origin of jaws are thus entirely based on either imaginary transformation theories, based on presumed homologies of the oral apparatus of extinct vertebrates, or more recently, inferences based on data from developmental genetics. Well, first of all, developmental genetics is an excellent source. Secondly, he's simply wrong. We do have some very excellent data on the development of jaws. But of course, he's going to ignore that. And when you look at his sources down here, he does reference Jan Veer from 2007, who's a very good source, actually is a very good source. But again, people can use sources how they want. He also uses Carroll, references Carroll several times. This was written in 1988. And he also references Stahl, which was written in 1974. This is something that is very common with these folks. These old references. And Jan Veer is a book. Hang on, let me look at the other stuff. Yeah, the Jan Veer book he's talking about is Philippe Jan Veer. I may be mispronouncing his name wrong. Is Homologies and Evolutionary Transitions in Early Vertebrates. In Anderson Jason and Hans Dieter Sue's edition, Major Transitions in Vertebrate Evolution. But that was written in 2007, and that's, 11 years ago? We've gone a long way since then. And we do have some really good information on jawed vertebrates. There's even a fellow at the University of Bristol that I've paid a lot of attention to who's been doing a lot of work on this. So yeah, you're just a little behind the time there. Let's go. It's on the origin of amniotes. He goes on birds. And again, let's look at this. He goes Stahl. What is reference to Stahl from 1974, Carroll from 1988, and then Fiducia from 1999. Fiducia is an outlier. He's a paleontologist. He's probably one of the last, if not the last major paleontologist who doesn't believe that birds are dinosaurs. So what's happening here, and creationists do this a lot, they love fiducia because fiducia challenges the paleontological orthodoxy as far as birds, which is fine. You know, nothing wrong with challenging the orthodoxy, the status quo. But fiducia has been doing it for so long. It's one of these cases where even as new information comes in, he's just refusing to accept it. So he's kind of become a crank at this point. So there's another really great reference here, Fiducia from 1989. And I actually have the quotes because when he quotes Carroll, hang on a minute. It says, no fossils are known of an immediate common ancestor that might have given rise to Crossopterygians and the Dipnoi. Dipnoi being lungfish. That's not true. Remember, this was written in 1988. It says we have not established, another one is we have not established the specific origin of coelacanth. And actually we have Kingmenodus, Qingmenodus, which is a stem coelacanth. But again, this reference is from freaking 1988. Again, there's more. I have references here. I don't need to go into how we do have evidence, like the ostracoderms became the acanthoidians, and I can't pronounce anything today, which became the sarcopterygians. And the acanthoidians may have given rise to modern bony fishes, the osteichthyes, or have a common ancestor with both. But again, they're using old references here, not even remotely up to date. And then this might be boring for some people, I know. But then I'm not in the fun stuff yet. I know. On the origin of, wait a minute, what the heck happened here? Did I lose my spot? Oh, no, I'm. Yeah, again, okay. This is.
Here.
Yeah, and again, no, I accidentally put something out of order. But again, these old books, and he goes on the origin of amniotes. The amniotes are, birds that have amniotic sacs. And again, we're looking at Stahl, 1974, Carroll, 1988. And what was my references here? Yeah. But again, the things that they're saying, like, okay, he goes, the origin of the Periosaurus remains speculative. The origin of snakes is still an unresolved problem. Not so much. The ancestors of snakes had tiny hind limbs with ankles and toes. And Sang et al. Said the origin of snakes, revealing the ecology, behavior, and evolutionary history of early snakes using genome phenomics and the fossil record, which is in BMC evolutionary biology. So yeah, we do know. It's just that this is so freaking behind the time. I mean, there's a lot we don't know. Fossilization is a rare process, and for some geologic periods, we don't have a lot of strata, Langenstatten, available. Occasionally, there are special circumstances: volcanic ash, mummification. Look at the La Brea tar pits and peat bogs. Remember the Iceman that was found in the in the mountains? Just forgot the name of them. We see mammoths and amber, and we have better methods, including better X-rays, MRIs. As I mentioned before, we can create 3D models. Not only that, there are some 3D models we can look at online. It's really cool. And so we still have a lot to discover. And look at the agamid lizards, which are widely dispersed, but little known. Relatives of the iguanas that are better known, and only fairly recently, scientists discovered that the green iguana has unidirectional breathing like birds. So there's still a lot we don't know. The idea that because we don't know certain things, that there's something wrong with science, there's something wrong with evolution, there's something wrong with biology, is ridiculous, because it's a huge world out there. we're even just in the last few years, we've discovered mammal species we didn't know existed. And, we're constantly discovering new species. So this idea of, Utsi is how you pronounce it? Yeah, anyway. So this idea that because certain things are unknown, everything falls apart is just absurd. So I'm going to kind of skip through because it gets kind of boring. I could, I could go into some of this a lot more, but I think it kind of gets boring if you go step by step and go through every single page. So let me just, start to flip through to some of their problems here, and especially the fun stuff when you start talking about people. And let me get to it. Okay. My response at the end was grrr, grrr. This is what, you know what this guy does, this complete creep? He ends his book with his with the quote from Martin Niemöller. I could never pronounce his name right. And here's what he's doing, and this infuriates me because everybody knows this quote. They came after the Jews, and I was not a Jew, so I did not object. They came after the Catholics, and I was not a Catholic, so I did not object. They came after the trade unionists, and I was not a trade unionist, so I did not object. Then they came after me, and there was no one left to object. This, I'm trying to be nice.
Who was that quote from? I've heard that before.
The Reverend Martin Niemöller. Yeah. This is a quote about, this is a quote about the Nazis. And he is saying,
right, I know what it is.
He didn't object. This creature, Kevin Worth, is comparing the treatment of creationists to the academic
what the fucking Nazis did. I've heard it before. This is why I might become angry enough to be violent, because if you're going to say that, oh well, someone in the science, someone like Fiona or Dragnut or even that bitch scientist Sam is a Nazi, I'm going to fucking hit you. What can I do?
This is one of the most objectionable things I've seen, to compare the alleged, and believe me, it's very alleged, treatment of creationists who object to evolution, to compare their treatment in academia and to some extent in business to the Jews under Hitler is just appalling, disgusting, and every other word you can possibly think of. Okay, so...
And by the way, the Nazis didn't come for the Catholics.
Well, actually, at one point they did, but that was later. And it was
much later. So small as to be nothing compared to what else they did.
Right, but from what Niemöller is talking about from his point of view, he didn't speak up when these things happen. Okay, so the thing is, we're going on to chapter 2, Intolerance Against Darwin Skeptics. This is actually where it gets more interesting. It says the debate about creationism, intelligent design often degenerates to attacking the Darwin doubter in some way, even when Darwin critics are ostensibly concerned primarily or solely with science. Dr. Richard Culp summarized his experience, noting that while the, quote, evolutionist experiences tolerance of his teaching and ideas, quote, ... he is intolerant of this concept of special creation. Okay. This is from a quote from 1975. Okay. And this comes from a book called Remember Thy Creator. And he said in that book, Remember Thy Creator, one who doubts the Genesis account will not be the same man he once was, for his attitude toward Holy Scripture has been eroded by false teaching. Genesis is repeatedly referred to in the New Testament, and it cannot be separated from the total Christian message. I'm sorry. So you can see what his position is. Do we care what his position is? Do we have any And he says, to support this assertion, this is good. He cites several cases, including a horticulture professor in Nebraska who debated a creationist and reportedly lost. The defeated professor responded by endeavoring to impede the activities of a local church involved in creationism. This is all hearsay. So we've got a guy who, let's see, I think I have this here. Oh, darn it, I forgot to mention it, but he's deceased now. So he wrote this book in 1975, and it's filled with hearsay. I heard about this guy who like debated an evolutionist, and he won, and the evolution was so mad that he interfered in the local church. It's all hearsay. There's no proof or evidence whatsoever. And he then talks about what's his name? Professor John Hand, who said the desperate attempt of evolutionists to crush all of opposition to their doctrine. And he says that will make you unpopular in worldly society. Just announce that you do not believe in evolution. You will get the raised eyebrow treatment immediately. You will see the sly, smirking smile exchanged between your hearers, and you will be politely snubbed and avoided as if you were a leper, no matter what your qualifications otherwise may be. You can deny anything else in the book, but never evolution. And Hand then quotes Thomas Dwight of Harvard. Okay. So Bergman is quoting Hand, who wrote a book in 1972. Hand is then quoting Thomas Dwight of Harvard, who died in 1911, and is quoted in Hand. And Thomas Dwight was a professor of anatomy, not an expert of. So he says the tyranny in the matter of evolution is overwhelming to a degree of which the outsider has no idea. He died in 1911, and this is his opinion. What on earth does that have to do with today? And then he quotes University of Chicago professor Paul Choret. There exists no cause so completely immune from criticism today as evolution. Paul Choret was born in 1887 and died in 1934. And again, he was a classical scholar, not a scientist. And he's being quoted in this book by Hand, a book written in 1972, and Bergman is quoting him. This is useless information, and it's opinion, and it's obscure information. Wow, some people were allegedly mistreated or looked at funny. I don't really care. And it goes on to complain again, and with more ridiculous references that come from 1987 and 1982. But as I said, that's just typical stuff. So this is all hearsay, and he also talks about how because intolerance began almost a century ago. And he talks about Byron Nelson, the author of the classic After Its Kind, first published in 1927. But here's where his information comes from. Letter from Anita Nelson to Jerry Bergman in 1982. So the man's widow, I'm assuming she's his widow, wrote a letter to Jerry Bergman. More hearsay? Do we care? Hang on, I'm looking this up. Another. Let me go back a bit. Another reference he used was George Leno and Barbara Lee, called "Academics in Court: The Consequences of a Faculty Discrimination Against Litigation." And he's using this as a reference. It's not about creationism or religion. As a matter of fact, it's been used in women's studies programs. That goes to show you how far off Bergman is with this stuff. He also references James Wood, Maurice Jackson, quote unquote, a work called Social Movements. Social Movements, Development, Participation, and Dynamics. And again, like in this case, taking this is from 1982, taking this completely out of out of context. And After Its Kind by Byron Nelson, who we were just talking about, it says an Amazon review. Some of these things you can't even find online, but some quotations from the book. That evolutionary biologists claim today they have produced many new species by the crossing of different species of plants. But when their claims are analyzed, it is seen that these so-called new species they have produced are essentially the same as mules and cattle, pseudospecies. And if the appendix is a vestigial organ in man because its function is unknown, then evolution has produced a totally useless organ in the entire animal world because no more is known about its function in the lower animals than in man. That's absolutely not true. I have a whole bunch of quotes from this guy, and it's a bunch of bullshit. So these are the kind of references he uses. Now I know this is kind of probably kind of boring. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at some of the references. So on page 82, his references letter from Paul Bartz to Jerry Bergman. And on 86, letter from Paul Elwenger to Jerry Bergman. And he references this several times. And it conflates ID and creationism. And then we have, on page 89, letter from Dave Sack to Jerry Bergman. Letter from Doug Sharp to Jerry Bergman. By the way, I've looked up all of these things, which would really bore the hell out of people. And then it gets really interesting because on page 90, he talks about Jack Cuozzo in his book Buried Alive, discusses the violent reaction that his research into Neanderthal man caused, providing another illustration of the extreme reaction that can result from Darwin. Now, no, Jack Cuozzo is a nutter. He's an orthodontist who works in a hospital. I'm quoting. He's an orthodontist who works in a hospital. Excuse me. I'm not quoting from Bergman. Okay. He's an orthodontist who works in a hospital in New Jersey, trained in forensic anthropology by the noted physical anthropologist. Anyway, he's been as stated by the Neanderthal fossils and personally examined. I mean, he actually did. Now, this really interesting thing about him is that this is from Talk Origins. The really interesting about him is that he is a trained dentist, and he did examine Neanderthal fossils, and he was actually able to show the people in the museum some things they didn't know. But what's really interesting is that this part of it. I've read his book. Running through the book is a rivulet of paranoia. A rivulet, did I say? An ocean, more like. The entire book is soaked in it and even infuses the description of the fossils themselves. The entire first section of the book, 15 chapters long, is a pain of paranoia. There in 1979 is our hero with his wife and 5 children traveling to Paris. They breached the defenses of the Musée Léon, bastion of evolutionism, hiding their x-rays from the staff, lest their true purpose be discovered. They are dogged by a mysterious Mr. McHugh in Normandy. A furtive visit to the Louvre spent dodging a sinister American. Doubtless an evolutionist sent to tail them. Their suspicions confirmed when he is detected that evening dining in the same pizzeria. After which there is a high-speed car chase through the suburbs of Paris, followed not by 1, but 2 cars driven by evolutionists. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of it. Did you get the idea? The guy's a nutter. And he just made up a bunch of stuff. Okay. And the next page, what are his references? Anonymous letter to Ken Ham. Interview of a Midwestern University professor by Jerry Bergman. An anonymous letter, some interview that by somebody you don't know. And then a couple pages later, neither the name of the professor who submitted neither the name of the professor who submitted the paper nor the lab can be revealed due to the professor's concern about his career. It can be stated he does not live in America. The blind peer reviewer's name is not known. And then when you go to page 94, letter from Anonymous to Jerry Bergman. And he's quoted two separate letters from Anonymous, so I'm assuming they're two different letters, although they were both from 2006. The author did not want their name known. Okay. Now this is an interesting case. It says one of the problems is the Russell P. Reach, a Harvard law graduate. Harvard, yeah, I got to read this to you because then I got to comment on it in a minute. Russell P. Reach, a Harvard Law School graduate, scored a perfect 800 on the law school examination test. Extremely rare. He achieved an outstanding academic record in spite of the fact that he worked full-time to support a family while attending Harvard Law School. He was also an active conservative Christian and creationist. Harvard Law School graduates experience about a 50% job offer rate for each interview. A person who interviews for two positions usually receives one offer. And the vast majority of Harvard Law graduates receive offers before they graduate. Okay. But he had a couple dozen interviews and nobody wanted to hire him. And he finally received an offer from a Texas Christian law firm. Now, it says your potential employees would likely have known of his religious faith because his undergraduate work was compiled at Bob Jones University. There's a red flag. Now, there's no reference for any of this. Okay. Now, here's one of the problems, though. He was there's not a lot of information. Bergman leaves out a lot of stuff. So I didn't even know when this happened. So he was the this guy, though, this Mr. Reach, was the managing editor of Harvard Law Review 1984 to 1985. And yet he went to Bob Jones University, which was not accredited until 2005. They didn't drop their interracial dating rule in 2000. On their front page used to be an anti-Catholic screed. He's probably right that the law firms took one look at this guy who graduated from an unaccredited school and decided maybe they didn't want him in their firm. Now, of course, we don't know what happened in the interview. Maybe the guy's a real jerk. I don't know. Maybe he's a really nice guy. I don't know. Law firms can be really touchy about who they hire. I have a friend who is an attorney. Well, I've had more than one friend who's an attorney, but um, they, when, especially big law firms, when clients come to them, they want to know the pedigree of the people who are working at the law firm. I have known people who suffered some discrimination because they went to a state college, not an Ivy League college. Some big law firms will look at that and go, state college. Yeah, well, let's see if we can do better. This guy graduated from Bob Jones, an unaccredited school. Yeah, he did well at Harvard, but do you want him on your masthead? And is that prejudice? Yeah. Is it unfair? On its face of it, yeah. But that's the way things go. And as I said, it's not just that he went to an unaccredited school, but law firms can be really annoying. And again, we have another case history in Jerry Bergman's files as a reference for something on page 96 because, hey, let's just have anonymous references, and those are really good, right? I mean, those tell us a lot. And then there's Dr. Vernon Gose. Okay. Let's see. Gose is a really interesting case. Let me find it in the book. Darn it, I can't find it right now. And of course, silly me, I didn't bother to put the you know what? Let me look it up in the back. Dr. Vernon Gose is a really interesting guy. Let me look at the page. And of course, this is another case of him being discriminated. That's not what I was looking for. Okay, hang on a minute. Okay. That doesn't work. Hey, guess what? He's got a lousy index. Um, yeah, and here I am not saying anything because I can't find the flipping thing I'm looking for. So, but let me tell you about Dr. Vernon Gose, who was apparently terribly mistreated, and I don't remember where. Uh, so this is really annoying. Well, Gose, let me just tell you about him. So, Dr. Vernon Gose is a very impressive resume. He's an aerospace engineer, air disaster analysis, risk management expert, and former member of the National Transportation Safety Board. Okay. But he's also single handedly responsible for fucking up California education. He was in 1969 the California State Advisory Committee on Science Education, appointed by the California State Board of Education, compiled and presented a set of recommendations and proposed curriculum guidelines for public school science courses. And Gose wrote and presented a document arguing that evolutionary theory was biased and should be taught only if alternative views were presented. He convinced the Board of Education to modify its position on the teaching of evolution. The board modified the science framework for science for California schools so that the theory of creation would be included in textbooks. So, oh, hang on it. Anyway, I can't find where that is in the book, and I'm really frustrated with myself that which is really annoying because it looks like I put the page number for everybody else except him. What a bleeping idiot. So let's go on to the more interesting cases. Yeah, and I know I'm probably boring people here. And they're talking about denial of earned degrees. Yeah, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. And he says admission problems. And he says Warner, of course, again, he's using somebody else, related the case of a former missionary, who the missionary is, where he came from, what time it was. We don't know. So some former missionary applied to a major university as a doctoral candidate in anthropology. During his interview, he was asked by the department chair if he had accepted the theory of organic evolution, to which he replied that he had not. He was then told that they accepted no doctoral candidates who were not evolutionists. I'm sure they didn't use that language. That the nearest they had come to was to accept one master's degree candidate who was not an evolutionist. Thus, they can say no anthropologist denies evolution. Why? Because no one who denies evolution is allowed to become an anthropologist. Yeah, no kidding. If you start, anthropology, for one thing, let's remember archaeology is part of anthropology, human origins is part of anthropology. So we're going to admit someone into the anthropology doctoral program who is going to deny human evolution? If we did that, well, there goes the study of anthropology. How ridiculous is that? And this is an interesting one because I know about this one. Is Tom Youngman. The way this is placed by sorry about that. I had a fly decide to visit me. At least I hope it was a fly and not a mosquito. Tom Youngman, he ran into problems when he applied to a PhD program in biology. He discovered the true colors of what is his thesis. Committee members with 2 letters of recommendation were accidentally mailed back to him. Okay, so let me tell you what this is. It was as he worked very hard and completed. This is from the letter. He worked very hard and completed the thesis despite the questions and reservations expressed by me and the other members of the committee. During this time, it became obvious that Tom was quite determined to complete his thesis, but that he was more interested in achieving the degree goal than in finding something out of an interesting scientific nature. And so there's a bunch of bitching about how He was so bright and trained and intensely interested as a biologist. I was a member of his MA, and so on and so forth. But here's the real story, guys. Youngman was accepted into the master's program somewhat reluctantly because he was creationist. Remember, colleges and universities are represented by their graduates, right? They don't want to have people think that they're graduating people who deny the basis of the disciplines that they're engaged in. For example, a biologist who denies evolution. What sense does that make? But they reluctantly let him into the master's program on the condition that he not pursue a doctoral thesis. And he said he wouldn't. He said, nope, I just want the master's because I think because he was going to teach, something like that. So, okay, fine. They let him in the master's program. Got his master's degree, and then applied for a doctorate. After saying that he wasn't going to go for a doctorate. Mind you, that's not in this book. Because they don't want to tell you the real story. They want to tell you the story that makes everybody look so bad. And of course, that's more and more whining. And then, let me. And here we go. The case of Arthur Custis. And look at something here. I actually have tons of notes here that would bore the tears off of people, even if if I went through them. I'm probably boring people as it is. But if anybody ever gets questioned about dissent against Darwin, just let me know. I'll be happy to talk about it with you. So here's the case of Arthur Custis. In one of the better documented cases, Canadian creationist Arthur C. Custis, considered by some creationists to be among the pantheon of anti-evolutionist martyrs, was denied a PhD in anthropology from the University of Toronto because of his religious beliefs. Numbers recounts a highlight of the case as follows. Numbers is the person he's quoted. The book is from 1982. This is the quote from the book. Despite some problems over unexcused absences from classes, he thought he was doing well until the oral part of his comprehensive examinations, when a professor asked, "Do you believe Adam and Eve were real people?" When Custis answered in the affirmative, one of the committee members reportedly threatened to resign if they put through a man for a PhD who believes in this kind of crap. Concluding that Custis's lapse in judgment reflected insufficient scientific training and unwilling to have him represent the department as its first PhD, the faculty strongly encouraged him to withdraw, which he eventually did. And there goes anthropology again. So this is the first PhD from this department, I guess. And they're going to give somebody a doctoral thesis who believes in Adam and Eve. I kind of think there's more to this story, because he could believe that Adam and Eve were real people and still accept evolution. So he did withdraw. And he did finally receive a PhD from Ottawa University. Now, of course, it's entirely possible you had some contrary professor on that board who said he'd quit. I don't quite buy it, though. This might seem... It just doesn't strike me as being completely accurate. And so many of the stories in this book are not completely accurate, so I'm skeptical. My guess is it was more than just believing in Adam and Eve were real people. Okay. Now we've got Brian Leonard, intolerance at Ohio State. I'm not going to go on with this for very long. I'll probably do a second one or third one sometime later. And this was Hilliard high school biology teacher Brian Leonard, and his and apparently, according to this, 3 Ohio State University professors recently launched a public smear campaign against graduate student Brian Leonard, whose dissertation studied the effects of teaching Darwinism's weaknesses alongside its strengths. The professors accused Mr. Leonard of unethical behavior for challenging evolution, but they did not refute Leonard's thesis, nor did they read his dissertation. Okay. There is, of course, more to this. Leonard's final, I think this is from Panda's Thumb archives. Leonard's final dissertation committee did not meet those proper requirements. It was composed of his advisor, Paul Post, from the Technology Education Program area of the section for Math, Science, and Technology, Glenn Needham of the Department of Entomology in the College of Biological Sciences, and Robert D. Silvestro of the Department of Human Nutrition in the College of Human Ecology. For the final defense, an assistant professor from the Department of French and Italian in the College of Humanities was also assigned to the committee to monitor the procedure. Thus, there were no members from the Science Education Program area on Leonard's final dissertation committee. That lack was pointed out to the university by 3 senior members of the university's graduate faculty in a letter to the appropriate administrations. Okay. All 3 were and still are full professors of the OSU graduate faculty. Excerpts from that letter are quoted in an excellent summary on the OSU newspaper, which, by the way, I found. So not only did Leonard's committee not meet the requirements of his program, 2 of the 4 members were prominent ID proponents. Needham and D. Silvestro were active in Ohio ID circles, and both signed the DI's dissent from Darwin's statement. Along with Leonard, D. Silvestro testified in the Kansas Kangaroo Court. Leonard described his unpublished work in that hearing. And you can go. And after biologist and dean of the School of Biological Sciences, Joan Herbers, was added to Leonard's committee, replacing the assistant professor of French and Italian, Leonard's defense was postponed at the request of his advisor, and as far as I know, it was never rescheduled. Okay. And I have the whole OSU takes a closer look at the graduate student's dissertation. And here's the thing. Okay. It says Ohio State doctoral candidates Brian Leonard's dissertation is being investigated by the School of Teaching and Learning and the College of Education as a result of controversy surrounding Leonard's views on evolution, his use of human subjects for testing, and his public association of his beliefs with OSU. On May 6, Leonard testified before the Science Committee of the Kansas Board of Education in describing to the committee his teaching in the 10th grade classes at Hilliard-Davidson High School in Hilliard, Ohio. He said, "And the way in which I teach evolution in my high school biology class is that I teach the scientific information, or in other words, the scientific interpretations, both supporting and challenging macroevolution." And in response to questioning by Kansas officials, Leonard testified he neither believed that all of life was biologically related to the beginning of life, nor that human beings are related by common descent to pre-hominid ancestors. And upon learning of Leonard's testimony earlier this month, 3 OSU professors signed a letter to the graduate school interim dean that said there is evidence that Mr. Leonard's dissertation committee has been improperly constituted and that his research may have involved unethical human subject experimentation. Leonard's main dissertation research question is, when students are taught the scientific data both supporting and challenging macroevolution, do they maintain or change their beliefs over time? What empirical, cognitive, and or social factors influence students' beliefs? And the 3 professors said, we note a fundamental flaw. There are no valid scientific data challenging macroevolution. Mr. Leonard has been misinforming his students if he teaches them otherwise. His dissertation presents evidence that he has succeeded in persuading high school students to reject this fundamental principle of biology. As such, it involves deliberate miseducation of these students, a practice we regard as unethical. So, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's a really, really nice article from the from the OSU paper, and it kind of tells you there's a lot more to this than you think. And Leonard was an activist. He wasn't just a guy trying to get a degree. He was an activist, which of course brought him a lot of attention. Then there's E. Norbert Smith. Now, E. Norbert Smith, ouch, has actually written some really good papers, usually about like alligators and crocodilians all together. And he says here, 2 months after his graduation from Baylor, a paper of his was published in Creation Research Society. His major professor found out and was outraged. He informed Smith that had anyone known of his creationist beliefs, he would not have been accepted for Baylor for graduate study. Now, he then applied to UCLA. He was one of only about 10 incoming doctoral students that year to totally pass all of his qualifying exams without needing any additional coursework. And this is one of the things I forgot to mention earlier when the guy was like the perfect candidate, had all the 800 on his law school. One of the things you notice going through Bergman's book is all of his candidates are just geniuses. They got perfect grades. They were outstanding in their field, probably with a pitchfork. And it's just, it's total hyperbole about how great they are. So let's see. Anyway, he turned down UCLA, decided to complete at Texas Tech because he was missing stuff up. But the point we have to make again is, are you going to accept someone as a student, as a PhD student in biology or zoology, who denies the basis of that field? And that's what runs through all of this. That's what runs through all of this. And then there's a case of Bill Keith, whose son was ridiculed in school because he was a creationist. Well, you know what? By the teacher. And the teacher shouldn't have done that. One instance does not make a case. And then there's Michael Denny, who was professor of biology, wrote that before he would write a letter of recommendation, the student must set up an appointment where he would ask the student, how do you think this human species originated? If you can't not truthfully and forthrightly affirm a scientific answer to this question, then you should not seek my recommendation for admittance to further education in the biomedical sciences. The central unifying principle of biology is the theory of evolution, which includes both micro and macroevolution, which extends to all species. How can someone who does not accept the most important theory in biology expect to properly practice in a field that is so heavily based on biology? And so what's happening is there apparently a student who needed a letter of recommendation to apply to medical school did not get a recommendation from him. Wow. I feel so sorry for that student. And yeah, there's some more. Whining that professors mistreat people because they won't accept the basis of biology. They won't accept the basis of geology. And there's one guy saying his research went well until he became a Christian. Well, that's not synonymous with creationist. And he said, this guy said, he had boasted that I was better without a course in microtechnique than most students with the course. Again, all these creationists in this book seem to be really remarkable individuals. And there's another guy who he had to hide his beliefs as an undergraduate and thus was admitted to a PhD program without problems. He completed his coursework with almost straight A's. Yeah, again, almost straight A's. And another guy, Dirk Ronauer, had nearly completed his PhD in evolutionary biology. Although his GREs in biology were exceptionally high, as were his grades, his community removed him from the university. So you will see this over and over and over again, that these guys are just absolutely freaking geniuses. Anyway, I think I'm going to be done for now. This wasn't terribly organized. Apologies. But I was bored and cold. Cold. I was outside in the yard, too much and cold. So this is going to be part one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do part two, and I'll be more organized. I knew I wasn't organized going in this. But this was kind of just a test to see if I could remember how to do a hangout, for one thing. Just to remember how I could do a hangout. So I'll be more organized for the next one, and it'll be more interesting. But I also kind of wanted to get this back stuff out of the way before we go into the fun cases. So this is a bit boring, I know. Apologies to everyone, but I hope you at least got something out of it. And Crow Many Clouds. I'm not hearing much slaughter or creationists being thrown into gas changers. I'm beginning to think Jerry Bergman is a teller of tall tales. That's a pretty darn good description of Jerry Bergman. To end with, all of the creationists or ID proponents in this book, or at least nearly all, who are being so mistreated and discriminated against, are all apparently just geniuses. They straight A's, high scores, excellent work, top of their class. Just kind of interesting right there. Most of the sources that are being used here by Bergman are really old. And I've looked them up in detail. Some of them you can't find. And when he's misusing sources, like that one I mentioned that's actually being used in women's studies courses, and that other one that's about social, well, I forget what it is, social groups or something. It's like the people we have here on YouTube who will read a paper or an article and they'll find words that they think support them, and they'll go, look right there, even if it completely contradicts what they have to say. Now, I haven't necessarily seen anything that contradicts Bergman, but he does love his references, and he throws a ton of them in there, and some of them are just for a few words and sometimes taken out of context. And then there are his other references, which are the mysterious ones. Some anonymous person here, there, or everywhere. And of course, there's all the hearsay. But the bottom line for most of this is what I've said in the beginning. These people have been denied degrees. Yes. They've been denied advancement in their degrees, like, getting a master's degree. They've been denied entrance into a degree program like a master's or a doctorate. Yes, they have. And although we didn't really get into it, they may have been denied job opportunities. The one example we've gone to now is a guy denied entrance into the law school, which is just a really weird example for Bergman to bring up. I mean, think about it for a minute. So the guy goes to an uncredited university, although he did well in law school, and he doesn't get a job, which he assumes is because he's a creationist. Maybe it's because he went to an uncredited school. But that's the only. But are our people probably denied advancement? Yeah, sure they are. But if you're going to deny the basis of the science you're working in, and for biology, that basis is the theory of the biological theory of evolution. All of biology is built on that theory, and medicine is becoming increasingly dependent on the theory. And we didn't talk too much about geology here, but if you're going to deny the old age of the earth, you're going to deny geological processes. Why would someone let you into a master's or PhD program of biology? It makes no sense. So if you're going to believe something, everybody has the right to believe what they want. If you're going to believe something that runs completely contrary to the field that you want to be in, don't be surprised if you get your hands slapped. And with that, I guess I'll say good night. And as I said, next time, I'll be organized. So good night, all.